The Baltimore Ravens won't see the Cincinnati Bengals until a bit later in the 2025 season, but that hasn't stopped a lot of people from talking about the scheduling advantage the Ravens have over the Bengals, including Joe Burrow. We talk about his comments and a lot more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe as well. We're a 5-day-a-week daily Ravens podcast, and thank you out there to all the everydayers, first-time listeners, and if you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. Here with us today, talking Ravens football, it is Jeff Zrebiec of The Athletic, a recurring guest on this show. He's been on a couple of times. Jeff, it's been a while since we last spoke before the year started in 2024. It started off a little slow. They got it back together, got the AFC North crown, and then obviously their season ended in a bit of disappointment. Baltimore hoping to get that sour taste out of their mouth. How have you been, and how do you feel like this past handful of months have gone for this Ravens team dating back to August of last year?
Good. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Kevin. I think last year we had talked about it, I'm sure. And one of the things that really came to fruition, I think early last year in them starting in an 0-2 hole was just the brain drain on the defensive coaching staff. And I think, that was they did lose a lot of talent, last year in free agency and whatnot. But I think the biggest loss was always going to be, Mike McDonald and Denard Wilson and Anthony Weaver, and just the turnover from the coaching staff. And I think we saw that early. Look, this defense was a shell of itself. Wasn't getting big stops, wasn't getting many stops at all. And it took a while to steady itself, right? And I think that, kind of forced them to dig out of a hole a little bit. We saw the defense improve and then make some adjustments, and Zach Orr sort of grow into that defensive coordinator role. He deserves a learning curve. Mike McDonald got a learning curve, if we all recall. I think we all remember Rex Ryan saying this hotshot young defensive coordinator doesn't know what he's doing, and Mike McDonald certainly worked out pretty well in the long run. So they look as dominant as any team in football at times during the regular season. I think the roster was plenty good enough to win a Super Bowl. You could always get better. You could always add pieces, but I think they were plenty good enough. The hardest part about evaluating the Ravens, I'm talking about my own perspective too, and covering this team, is it's like, everyone wants to know, what is the magic potion that's going to push them, take them to the next step? What's the magic potion that's going to get them to the Super Bowl? And, this is a really smart organization. There's a lot of really smart NFL insiders and people. And if the answer was that simple, it would have been uttered and added by now. It's just not. I mean, you just have to be at your best when your best is required. And they haven't been. And you could point a number of fingers. I think everyone in the organization wears it. I don't think it's one person. I don't think one person's exempt. I mean, I think we've seen it in all these playoff games. They're the same elements. They kind of get beat. They lose the physical matchup up front, which they did on both sides of the ball against the Bills. Lamar Jackson has some ill-advised turnovers. They have some other key players, pass catchers have made some mistakes. We saw it with, Zay Flowers, and Andrews has had, his share in the playoffs. And often, there's always been some questionable coaching decisions in all these losses, not running the ball in there when they had a chance there against the Bills and having to settle for a field goal. And, I thought Todd Monken was awesome last year. He had a great year, but again, it just kind of feels like until we get to January, and that's tough. That's a tough spot to be in. That's a lot of pressure to carry, but that they've earned that by some of these past playoff failures.
Yeah, when push comes to shove, we know, Jeff, this is going to be a good regular season team, barring catastrophic failure or injuries. But when the playoffs come around, you're right. It's just Baltimore somehow just has come up short. And a lot of that, you've mentioned a lot of those reasons. Also, the fact turnovers do play a major role, not just offensively, but really defensively. In these playoff losses, Baltimore's defense has not forced a lot of turnovers. In the 6 playoff losses Lamar Jackson has been a part of, there's a negative 13 turnover differential. And it's really difficult to overcome that because you have 15 offensive turnovers to just 2 takeaways for the Ravens defense, which is always going to be tough to overcome as well. So regular season is great. Playoffs, not so much. The Ravens will be going down another tough regular season road here, Jeff. And just to remind everyone of what the schedule is for Baltimore this year, they'll open up week 1 against the Bills on Sunday Night Football. They'll play a bunch of division winners in their first 6 weeks. Then they'll have, if you want to call an easy part of the schedule easy, but there's really not for the Ravens this year. It's that like Bears, Dolphins, Vikings, Browns, Jets area. But then the division games start up here where you have to play the Bengals twice in the final 6 weeks and the Steelers twice in the final 6 weeks. And Jeff, there has been controversy about that Thanksgiving night game Baltimore will host against the Bengals. And Joe Burrow made comments on that because right now, some of the biggest stories across the NFL, this is going to be the 3rd straight year the Ravens are hosting the Bengals for a Thursday night game, and it's the 4th straight primetime game Baltimore's going to be hosting Cincinnati. The Bengals have not won those 2 prior Thursday night games. It's actually only the 4th time in NFL history that a team has played on the road for 3 straight years on a Thursday night. All this coming courtesy of Warren Sharp, by the way, who does a great job. The Ravens in the last 20 years, they're 9-0 hosting Thursday night games, and the Bengals have only hosted the Ravens once on Thursday night since 2006. The Ravens are 2-6 on the road on Thursdays at home, and the Bengals are 2-6 on the road on Thursdays at home, but 7-2 at home. Joe Burrow talked about this. He was asked kind of about the Bengals schedule, some of the quirks in it, and he said, quote, "Playing in Baltimore for the 4th straight primetime year isn't ideal. Maybe we can get one of those in Cincinnati next year." And then he said, please, at the end to kind of say like, hey, what's going on here? Jeff, how big of a deal is this to you? Like, obviously there's a disadvantage technically here, but is this to you kind of just, okay, let's just go play the game and see what happens?
Sure, I think that, but I see it from the Bengals side. Like, look, Raven fans would be complaining the same way. I mean, let's face it. Like, they'd be saying the same stuff if they were going if they were, going to Cincinnati and had that same stretch was reversed, and they would be. So I get it. I get the frustration. But I mean, I think it's a huge compliment to the Ravens fans and the organization that they have that home field advantage, and it's particularly distinct in night games in prime time. I mean, that's that's a compliment and to them. And two, I don't have the numbers, Kevin. I wish I did, but there was a stretch. It wasn't that long ago where it seemed like every time the Ravens played Pittsburgh, it was a night game. Like, it wasn't like every year, but trust me, because we drive up the morning of the games, and many nights there. And it just seemed like every time they played at night in the Pittsburgh thing, it was always every time they played at Pittsburgh, it was a night game. And then Baltimore was usually a 1 or 4 o'clock game. It's just how it worked. Right. And there was a long stretch where that seemed to be the case. And some Ravens people would mutter about it too, so it works both ways. I get it. I think it's, I think it's cool, and it'll stoke the flames a little bit. I don't think anybody from the Ravens is irritated about the comments. I mean, Burrow's a character. I think he's great for the rivalry. He's great for the game. A lot of swagger, confident kid, not afraid to say what he means. So I didn't think it was anything malicious. He was pointing it out. Other people have pointed it out. I get why they're saying it. But I think that stuff turns too. And I think every team has scheduling advantages and disadvantages. There's plenty of stuff for the Ravens that they can complain about over the years. And certainly you understand why the Bengals are pointing to it. But again, I honestly, beyond that, the Pittsburgh and Bengals heavy stretch is going to be fascinating, right? I think, we can talk all we want about their tough September and starting the season with 5 of 6 against last year's playoff games, both top seeds. The Bills obviously were number 2 seed. So you're basically, you look at the Rams sitting there, and the Rams probably gave the Eagles the best game of anybody in the playoffs. Right. So you're sitting there, arguably you're playing, maybe you can make a case you're playing 4 of the top, 6 or 7 teams in football over the first couple weeks. So, but that wouldn't, it's a challenge that, but that wouldn't bother me necessarily, because those teams aren't going to be in midseason form either, right? Like, you're not facing the best Bills team and the best Chiefs team. And I think, you look at that as an opportunity. You get a couple early wins over 2 other teams that figure to be there in the end in the AFC, and it helps you in tie break. And, that goes a long way. But that stretch where they play, the Bengals and the Steelers both times and all that, and Bengals twice in 3 weeks. That is going to be a really challenging, interesting stretch.
I remember the Cleveland a couple of years ago where there was that whole fiasco. Like, you're right, Jeff. There are going to be advantages and disadvantages everywhere. And Mike North, who does a lot for the NFL, he's their VP of NFL broadcast planning and scheduling. He said that they couldn't put the Ravens on the road for 2 Thursday night games because they're already going on the road for that Miami game on Thursday night. So,
and they seem to love those Miami night games.
The Ravens maybe not so much. But I think for Baltimore, it's like, yes, there is a disadvantage aspect for Cincinnati. You're like, yes, the Bengals traveling to Baltimore, short week. It hasn't been in Cincinnati, and Mike North kind of said, hey, you know what? It's time for Cincinnati to have one. They're due, but they couldn't do it because of the whole scheduling with Baltimore already. He says, go to Baltimore and ruin their Thanksgiving. And that's just kind of what it comes down for me, Jeff. I think part of it is that the Bengals are 0-2 in those 2 Thursday night games. The Ravens almost lost that Thursday night game last year because that was the last game that the defense was horrendous before they had that players only needed.
Yeah, they should have lost that game. I mean, the strip of Marlon Humphrey kind of completely changed that game. I mean, the Bengals were going in there, right? And he pulled the ball out, and that guy holds on. I forgot was that Chase Brown.
I think it was Chase Brown. Yeah.
Yeah. He holds on to that ball. I mean, they couldn't get stops in that game, and they absolutely should have lost that game. And they should have probably won the game in Cincinnati. They botched the hold on McPherson's potential game-winning field goal. So, look, it's a burgeoning rivalry. I think they're going to be, especially with the Steelers quarterback questions and sort of how last season ended for Pittsburgh. They're going to be the consensus favorites in the AFC North, and you're going to have 2 guys who are probably going to be 2 of the 3 or 4 favorites for the MVP to start the season in Jackson and Burrow. So, you know why they want that game in prime time. These teams always play wild games. I mean, they're entertaining. They don't like each other. So you get it. But, as I said, I don't think it's a big deal. I think, it just reminds me of you almost play it up this year so it changes next year, right? Like, you want to say something this year. It's just like Sashi Brown said a couple months ago when he was talking to us at the owners meetings. We would really prefer not having that Christmas night game. You send a few hints out there, and you hope they're listening. So next year it changes stuff, but nothing's changing this year, and everyone will be looking forward to that game. It'll be probably the highlight of the Thanksgiving slate.
For sure. And, asking you shall receive. I feel like we might be the Ravens might be going to Cincinnati next year for a prime time.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I would be shocked. That's usually how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And, Cincinnati, their atmosphere, it's a cool atmosphere over there in the jungle. They have their thing. But obviously, as you said, Jeff, it's a testament to how the Ravens do their primetime games up at night. It's an incredible atmosphere at M&T Bank Stadium. And I think the NFL and everybody will be better for it being in Baltimore this year. And you know what? If it's Cincinnati's turn next year, that's just how the tables will flip. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about Derrick Henry's extension and who could be next for the Ravens with an extension. So stay tuned. Got a lot coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. You can post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires, and LinkedIn is the place to go for all of your job and hiring needs. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Again, post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher and Jeff Zrebiec still talking with you here. Jeff, Derrick Henry signed an extension with Baltimore last week. I feel like a lot of people could see this one coming. Derrick Henry making comments about the organization, his desire to stay with the team. And after Saquon Barkley got his big deal, it was time for Baltimore to probably get that done, especially before guys like James Cook maybe could have come in and swooped in, gotten money, and then made that extension more lucrative. So Derrick Henry gets 2 years, $30 million, 25 of that is guaranteed. Was this a shock to you at all, or was this something that you thought was inevitable?
Yeah, I didn't know. You never know with some of these deals, and but what's interesting is, they say it's, they talk about kind of how paying over 30 running backs is so risky, but yet this deal felt like not only one of the no doubters of the offseason, but it almost felt like one of the easier ones to get done because, like Henry made it clear this is where he's want to be. It's not like, Derrick Henry's been clear about what he's after at this stage of his career, and the Baltimore offers him all that. So it was like a perfect match between team and player. They both kind of bring out the best in each other. It just made too much sense to continue. And it's not like he was asking for, he got a nice payday. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like he was asking for groundbreaking market setting money like some of these, like a couple of these other deals I'm sure we'll talk about a little here. We're talking about highest paid player at their position. Lamar Jackson deal will be the biggest in NFL when it happens. And Kyle Hamilton will be the highest paid safety in the NFL. And Tyler Linderbaum, if he gets a deal, he may not be the highest paid center, but he's certainly going to be close. So this wasn't ever going to be the case with Henry. And you look at it for the Ravens, it just, it's a 2-year, $30 million extension, but you have to look at it over the 3 years, right? And, it was due to make $6 million this year with I think he already had basically a earned option bonus for $1 million. So it was already $7 million on the hook for this year for the Ravens. So you add 30 to it. So you look at it as a 3-year, $37 million deal that he's currently on. And I think that's that kind of settles him in behind Barkley and I think Christian McCaffrey right there. I'm not sure if another guy's ahead, but he's earned it. He's a great fit for the team. He wants to be here. And, for all that, for all that he did in terms of on the field and the production, everything, the touchdowns, the backbreaking runs, we all saw his impact. I just think the story that wasn't talked about as much is how he kind of raised the level of accountability and professionalism around that team. I think he certainly helped Lamar Jackson, was taking some pressure off him and just watching how that guy goes about his business and goes to work and how hard he works and how much he's driven, to be ready, to go for on Sunday and also to, work towards that ultimate team goal. I think that was he was a perfect figure and player to have around for when they got him. And I think it's perfect that they've continued that relationship.
They had guys, Jeff, like J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, et cetera, who were good players for them over their time in Baltimore. Derrick Henry's just, it's a different conversation with a guy like Derrick Henry.
Yeah, so, and then, you saw the business decisions too. I mean, you saw late in games, teams, it ain't fun hitting that guy. Of course I wouldn't know, but, it just doesn't look very fun having to hit that guy early in the game, never mind in the fourth quarter when you're trailing, you're all ticked off and you're tired, banged up, and then you got that guy who's in as good a shape as anybody in the league running downhill on you. You know, as I said, what they represent as a franchise and as a team, he embodies. So it just felt like a perfect fit when they added him. You didn't know how it would work out, and he was coming off a disappointing year while playing behind on a pretty bad team and offensive line. But it was one of those situations that when you visualize like best case scenario in terms of how a player fit, that hit it. That exactly was best case scenario. We saw that last year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people kind of maybe have put the pieces together, and you never know, Jeff, but if they had actually pulled off that deal for him at the deadline the previous season, was he the missing piece that they needed, especially with how the game script went? Maybe it was a half year too late, but the impact was tremendous. And if I got hit by Derrick Henry, I don't think I'd live with that. So I think, to me, just having a guy like that where business decisions have to be made, and some of those resulted in touchdowns. Like, that's just how it is. You don't want to tackle, and it's kind of those big hulking running backs late in games. You don't want to tackle that guy. You want to just let him run, especially in that cold December, January weather.
Yeah,
that's the guy you want on your side, not the other way around.
I think that run against Pittsburgh in that playoff game, they played them a couple times down the stretch, but I think it was the playoff game in Baltimore where he just there weren't a lot of Steelers lining up and say, hey, let me get in front. Let me fill that gap. So you saw it all year, really, he's a closer. And, you worry every extension you sign, there's a risk. So to say there's no risk is ridiculous. There's risk, and there's always risk with older players, but he makes you feel better about taking that risk because of his makeup and because of his work ethic and because of, his career and everything he stood for during his career.
Yeah, he has shared how much time, effort, and money he puts into his body to make sure that he stays in as best shape as he can. You mentioned the work ethic and how he goes about himself and his business. It made a lot of sense for Baltimore and Derrick Henry to both get this thing done. But as we've mentioned, Jeff, the Ravens still have a lot of extensions to kind of go down here. You got a checklist of guys that you're looking at for potential extensions. Lamar being the big one right now. There are a couple of others that we can get to as well. There's no shot that they let Lamar get to next offseason, whereas cap number balloons up, at least I think, to $70 million. It's difficult because those contracts, as we saw the first time around, they're difficult to get all the stuff worked out in. Do you feel like a Lamar extension, Jeff, could come by the time the season starts? Do you feel like this might drag out in the next offseason?
Yeah. A couple points. One, big picture. Maybe I'm wrong. We say things all the time that sometimes we're prisoners of the moment. But I don't recall too many instances at this stage of the offseason where there was as many like extension candidates. Like, they could extend any of 6 or 7 guys, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's not a surprise. And actually I did. I don't think it's run yet, but I wrote a story for The Athletic that I think will run this week, just looking kind of at some, you got, obviously you still have Lamar, and then you have, Oweh, and then you have Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely and Tyler Linderbaum and Kyle Hamilton. And is Bateman ticked off about his deal at Team Friendly? And do you try to do something for him? And is Van Noy is severely outperformed his deal? And you mentioned Travis Jones earlier, and they're obviously not going to do all those deals. Right. But it's just, it's a lot of guys, right? And each guy not only and this is the time of year to do it because it gives you kind of cost certainty. It starts checking off some items. Look, they're not done adding to the roster, but the heavy lifting is long over. This is their team. Now, they'll add a couple guys like they always do. Even sometimes they'll probably add during training camp, but this is their team. So the front office can actually focus on this. And then a lot of times this is the time of year players like to do it because they get peace of mind and stability heading into the offseason, and the team gets cost certainty and checks off big items on next year's to-do list. But obviously, like you said, and the second part of this is specifically on Lamar. Yeah, you'd like to say it has to get done. But then, we know the situation, we know the dynamic, and we don't know a whole lot about how Lamar views these things because he doesn't let anybody in on that. But we do know he's not going to be browbeaten to anything, and he's not going to feel pressure, and he's going to be on his time frame. That's how Lamar operates. That's how he's always operated. They don't know. I'm not saying I don't want to speak for the Ravens because frankly, one thing you want to say about this, and this is what makes it always so interesting to cover for me. Look, I'd love to, but they are so protective about their relationship with Lamar that you can't get anything on this situation. Like my guess is they've had meetings with Lamar this summer. Team official, like DeCosta's been down in Florida a couple times. I don't know his itinerary, but they just won't acknowledge it just because, trust is everything to Lamar. And if stuff starts getting leaked in the papers, he starts seeing it. It's going to impact the relationship they have with him, and it's going to make an already tough negotiations even tougher. So that's why nobody really hears anything, updates on this, because they're so cautious. And, Lamar doesn't have an inner circle. He doesn't have people that leak stuff on his behalf. So that's what the kind of the shroud of silence here, Kevin. But yeah, look, I think from the outside perspective, you look at it and you say, okay, you see that Josh Allen deal? We'll pony up a little bit more. Like we'll operate off that deal. We'll add, a few million here, a few million there, maybe a little guaranteed money, and bang, let's get this done, and we're all set. Because it would be almost impossible next offseason to build a Super Bowl caliber roster with him, nearing 75 million or whatever it is of cap space. So, but it's not that easy. It's never that easy in this dynamic in particular. We don't know in particular what Lamar is looking for, and is there certain things he wants? Is there, we do know that the longer he waits, the more leverage he's going to have. But is he looking for that leverage, or so? I don't, it seems like it could be kind of simple if you just say, okay, here's a new deal that makes you the highest paid quarterback in the league, beats Allen's deal. We need this. Let's get this done. But that's just not how the negotiations with him really operate and tend to work. So there's always a whole lot of uncertainty. I'm sure the team would love to get it done. And the best thing that they could do is just keep working at it and try to get some of these other deals done to set themselves up, set themselves up nicely, because, it just goes to show you, like we talked the offseason, like early in the offseason, I think we all assumed they were going to have to get something was going to have to happen, either an extension or a subtraction for them to fill the needs that they needed to fill and get guys in free agency, or just a mass of restructures, which we know they don't like doing. And, there've been a couple, right? I think Humphrey took a contract restructure, but Mark Andrews is still here. People assume that they had to do some of his contract. They didn't. And Lamar has not gotten his extension. And, and they've made it work. So they'll figure out a way. They'll keep figuring out a way. But, yeah, I mean, it should be the number one priority on Eric DeCosta's list at this point. I think it would be great. It would be, to get that done this offseason would be huge for them. But it just, again, like you say, it's always easier said than done. It doesn't sound like it should be so hard. We know the numbers, but it is. That's just the dynamic that they have in dealing with these negotiations.
Yeah, for sure. And look, they have a lot of extensions, like you mentioned, Jeff. They could sign anywhere from 6 to 9, 10 guys, and you feel like, yeah, all right.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. So to me, Baltimore, there are a lot of different avenues, but they still have time to get it done. So we'll see how it unfolds for them, but we'll talk about the offseason a little more coming up in the final part of the show, because, Jeff, there's a lot that Baltimore's done this offseason. And like you said, there might be more that they could do to add the finishing touches onto this roster. So stay tuned, planning to come up here on Locked On Ravens. Back on Locked On Ravens with Jeff Zrebiec of The Athletic. I am Kevin Oestreicher. And Jeff, There was unfortunate news last week for the Ravens with Darius Washington, who we mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, tearing his Achilles. Is going to be done for most, if not all, of the 2025 season. There have been rumblings about them potentially adding from outside the organization. I know Justin Simmons is the popular name that everybody's looking at. There are other options as well. Marcus Williams, by the way, not on that list for those who feel like there could be a reunion. It's not going to happen. I don't think it literally can happen with the NFL rules. But do you feel like, Jeff, they should or will go outside to add a vet, or do you think that they have trust in guys like the Bo Braid or Sanusi Kane to step into that role or Darius has left?
Yeah, I do. I think they probably will add a guy, but I don't think that will suggest that they don't believe in Sanusi Kane or Bo Braid. I think they see both those guys as core special teamers and guys who could potentially contribute and play. I would think Kane may be a little bit ahead there, but we'll see how that works out. But yeah, there's just a lot of names out there, and they're going to get a little bit of a boost here with the post June 1st cap space. They're going to get a little, and I haven't seen exactly Henry's breakdown yet, but they could get some more, a couple million in cap space there too, maybe with how it's worked out. And, so they have the financial flexibility to add, and there's enough guys out there. It's interesting, everyone wants Justin Simmons, and, I don't know, like, obviously this guy's had a really good career, but, he didn't really play well last year. And, maybe that was because he signed in like mid-August. So maybe that was part of it. I can't say I honed in on the Falcons too much and watched them play, but I think he had his fewest interceptions since 2017. He didn't get his hands on a lot of footballs. It just, is he willing to, they're not going to pay big for this role. I mean, we've seen it over and over again. They're just not. And will he accept a real short, relatively modest deal? I don't know the answer to that. I kind of was, I thought earlier this season, I don't know about his health. He was banged up last year, but Julian Blackmon, to me, Blackmon from the Colts, looks to be an interesting player with one of these upside signings that has some tools and has some qualities that they typically like. He's still out there. So, there's guys. I think they'll be able to get a guy, even if they have to wait a little while. And then, and I think you also are going to have some DBs you want to see on the field, and there'll be some looks where maybe you want to look at one of your corners and safety looks too. I mean, we've talked about that every year. You're going to want to get your young DBs on the field, right? And it's a shame though for our Darius Washington, just because that guy battled his butt off, was ready, and was one of the big reasons why they sort of found themselves defensively last year. I mean, you look at some of their biggest defensive plays of the season, and he had a hand in a few of them. So, he's closing in on a payday. It's just, it stinks for him. But I think there's enough out there, and they have enough on the roster already where this doesn't need to be a doomsday scenario. The only thing you don't like, Kevin, is, as you know, you're going to get banged up during training camp, during the preseason. It happens to every team. When you already lose a guy before that, it's just like, okay, you're already challenged your depth before you even get to Owings Mills in late July. And that's what kind of stinks about it from a team perspective. But they'll be just fine there. There's options there to replace them. And I think internally they have a little more than people think.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's just kind of more like the finishing touches on the roster right now, as opposed to them going for a big swing. Hopefully they can get the job done this time around. But I appreciate you hopping on, Jeff. Thank you for taking the time. Before we get you out of here, tell people where they can find you and what you're working on. We're recording this on Tuesday. OTAs are coming up before we know it.
Yeah. I as I said in the thing, I did do a story this week about kind of their options. This is the time of year. I thought going into the off season, I just separated Lamar because I explained, like, that's a different, I just don't know. Nobody really knows where that's at. But I thought the 3 deals that you would see this offseason, the most likely extensions were Henry, which that one's checked off, and then Kyle Hamilton and Isaiah Likely. And people may be surprised a little on Isaiah Likely, but they just don't very often allow ascending players that they drafted, especially kind of guys that they liked and they got in day 3. They don't usually allow those guys to walk out the door while they're in so those are the 3 I think I'm watching for, but there's plenty of other options. So I wrote a story kind of about their options there. And I'm excited for OTAs to start next week. That always kind of, that brings football season close when you see when you see most of the guys on the field. And from a contract extension perspective, and I'm not looking to stir it up here, but I'll be interested who's on the field next week. I think that's the biggest story. I think attendance of OTAs is generally overrated and over debated. I mean, Harbaugh has told us in the past there's guys he doesn't want to see on the field. He'd rather have young players getting reps. But if there's certain guys who we know may not be thrilled about their contract or heading into their free agent year or all that, not there, it's going to be a headline. You know how that works. And then here we go. Then we'll start the walk up to training camp. Is he going to be a hold in, or how's this going to happen? So, yeah, I'm excited. I'll obviously be out at the OTAs there for 3 straight weeks, and then we'll have the mandatory mini camp after that. This is a fun time to see kind of the pieces on the field at the same time.
Old faces, new faces. There's going to be a lot of excitement around the Baltimore Ravens this year. You can find the links to all of Jeff's work in the description down below. Jeff, I appreciate you again for hopping on, and thank you to everybody for watching and listening to the show today. On the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form, follow along in audio form, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.